Welcome back to the fourth and final part of the inventory series, and in this final episode, we'll be going over how the player can drop an item in their inventory. So to begin, let's create a remote event in the events folder in replicated storage. Let's actually name it drop. And next, let's go into the inventory handler script, and in this in the setup function, zoom in on that. Let's actually create a button pressed function. So text button, item, text button, mouse function. So what this line of code will do is actually detect when the button in the inventory is pressed. And let's actually call the remote event that we've made in the events folder. It's called drop. So press.events.drop fire server, and make sure you pass through the item name, or just pass through v. And make sure you also do this for the function in sortinv. Make sure it's right below the item button. .visible is equal to true. Instead of passing v, let's make sure you pass through items. And now we're actually done with everything in the inventory handler script. So now let's head on over to the server handler script we made in the last episode in server script service. So let's actually type the function that will receive the call from the client when it wants to drop an item by doing rs.events.drop.onServerEvent connect function. Pass through the parameters player and item name. So we obviously want to subtract one of the items the player wants to drop, since obviously they want to drop an item. But we also have to make sure the player has the item, because they can't drop something they don't have. So let's make a data variable, initialize it with the same value as the data from pickup function just above. So I'm going to just copy paste this variable, paste that. And now let's check if the player has the item by just making a conditional. So if data inventory item name equal, then return end. So we're actually just checking if the player has one or more of this item, and if they don't pass this conditional, then we'll just stop the function entirely, because we don't want the player to drop something they don't have. So let's actually subtract one of the items now. Let's doing data inventory item name equal -1. There we go. And let's clone the item that the player wants to drop from server storage by just doing local drop is equal to ss, or I have a folder of all the items that is pickable in my server storage. So I'm gonna clone the item the player wants to drop by just doing ss.items, find first child, item name, clone. And let's actually parent this dropped item to workspace. So drop.parent is equal to workspace, but I actually have a designated place I want things dropped to go in, and it's a folder called drops in workspace. So I'm just gonna do drops C's, not sure what that is. And since we have it parented, let's also move the item. So I'm actually gonna move the items to almost 5 studs away from the player and where they're facing. So to do that, make sure you define the player's humanoid root part. It's pretty much the center part, or the torso of the player. So local root is equal to player.character.humanoid root part. And let's use the pivot to method to actually move the item. So pivot to root.cframe plus root.cframe.look. Spelled C-frame wrong here. Times 5. And now that should work, but make sure you call the update data remote event that we've made in the last episode to update the amount of items the player has in the inventory. So events.update data, clone, fire client. Make sure you pass through parameters player and data. Let's actually check if that works. Wait for everything to load. And now when you see when I drop an item, I actually have it. Or it actually drops. So lastly, let's also check in the server handler script if the player has at least one or more of the items dropped after dropping it. So if data Tori item name is equal to 0, then remove the item or the dropped item from the priority table. So data priority and item name, and that should work. And now let's actually test it out one more time, make sure everything works. And it works. It also deletes the item as well. And you could also unanchor the items if you wanted to before dropping them by just doing, let's find it, just doing drop dot anchored is equal to false. Let's actually test that out again. Yep, it drops just like that.